Hey everyone, Sky here to discuss The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, starring Elijah Wood, Ian McKellen, Sean Astin, Viggo Mortensen, Orlando Bloom, John Rhys Davies, Liv Tyler, Cate Blanchett, Bernard Hill, and Billy Boyd, and directed by Peter Jackson. Now, before I get into this movie, I wasn't too excited about it coming out in theaters. It's like, it's a typical movie, that kind of a thing. And then I went and saw it opening day with my mom and my sister. And honestly, I remember being bored. And I also remember the endings were taking forever. Like, get to the point. What do I think of it now? Let's get into it. We start the movie off with a very tragic opening scene with Smeagol before he turns into Gollum, returned by Andy Serkis, and kills his friend or lover, depending on what you read in the book, Deagle, because he found Sauron's ring and takes it for his own as my precious otherwise, and gets transformed into Gollum and eats a fish with those teeth that looked frightening. And out of these opening sequences, this is by far the most intense. Meanwhile, we go back to Frodo, returned by Elijah Wood, and Sam, returned by Sean Astin, finishing off their quest as they get closer to Mordor, thanks to Gollum, and Sam lets Frodo know how much elven bread there is left, and how careful they have to be food-wise. And I like the fact that we focus on Frodo and Sam, unlike last week in the Two Towers, where we barely focus on them. Everyone gets an equal amount of screen time. Gandalf, returned by Ian McKellen, Aragorn, returned by Viggo Mortensen, Legolas, returned by Orlando Bloom, and Gimli, returned by John Rhys Davies, Merry, returned by Dominic Monaghan, and Pippin, returned by Billy Boyd at Isengard, with Treebeard, returning voice of John Rhys Davies, guarding Saruman, returned by Christopher Lee. If you watch the extended cut, he's barely there, with Wormtongue, returned by Brad Dourif. And they get killed and after 4 to 5 minutes of screen time, which was a good sequence. And Pippin picks up the ball of the eye. This time, more than ever, I wanted to kill Pippin throughout this whole movie, because he screws everything up right off the bat. The return of Rohan and celebrate the end of Saruman and King Theoden, returned by Bernard Hill, have a talk with Eowyn, returned by Miranda Otto, believe Aragorn is an honorable man. And he and Gandalf are either worried or wondering where Frodo and Sam are at, and if they're getting closer to Mordor. Meanwhile, Gollum leads Frodo and Sam to the dark tunnel to the spider I'll talk about later. And Sam overhears Gollum is planning on killing the hobbits, but Frodo wants to keep him around, which this is all going smoothly, just very nicely, I must say. Pippin takes the ball of the eye to look at it, and one more time, and you guys know how I feel about him, so Gandalf finds Pippin seeing the tree of Gondor burning with that city, and he takes Pippin because he's not safe to Gondor, to tell the steward of Gondor, who's Boromir's father, which I'll get into in a few minutes. But in the meantime, I don't really like that sequence. Arwen, returned by Liv Tyler, sees her unborn son's future, goes to her father Elrond, and asks him what he saw in the future, and she asks Elrond to make the sword Isildur killed Sauron with, and give it to Aragorn. And that scene, I felt, could have been cut. And this movie is way too long at 3 hours and 20 minutes, I must say. Gandalf and Pippin arrive at Gondor and meet Boromir's father, the steward of Gondor, Lord Denethorn. And this character is kind of an ass, because he demands to know why Boromir died, and Pippin asks oh man, I can't even say his name very well, Denethorn, to be his servant for his death, which was an inappropriate timing for the war of orcs that's coming. And I didn't mind that scene, but Pippin picked the terrible time to serve Lord Denethorn. Frodo, Sam, and Gollum go to climb a stairway and to lead them to Mordor, and the ring wants to go back to its master, which did feel pretty dangerous, and I want Frodo and Sam to successfully throw the ring in the fire, because I care too much for Frodo and Sam, and Gollum I don't think will make it, because he leads the hobbits to a dangerous way to Mordor, and I will talk about that later on. Faramir's men has been ambushed by the orcs, and Lord Denethor demands Faramir to risk his life, because Denethor doesn't care for Faramir as much as Boromir, which kind of selfish for me. Meanwhile, Pippin sends a signal from Gondor. There's war coming towards them, and I like that. It's a satisfying moment for me. It's very satisfying. Gollum throws away the Labrys bread when Sam isn't looking, puts some crumbs on Sam, and they wake up to see there's no more food left, and Sam suspects Gollum, and Gollum puts the blame on Sam, and not only the food, but the ring on Frodo's neck, and Sam beats up Gollum, and Frodo blames Sam and tells him to go home, and it's a very sad, I was very sad about it. I'm very sad about it because it's very selfish. It's not selfish, but it's upsetting and heartbreaking. This is the saddest Lord of the Rings movie yet, speaking of which, Pippin sings a song for Lord Denethor while Faramir gets killed by orcs, and I really like that song despite how sad it sounds. And it is. And Billy Boyd can sing very well, I must say. Merry wants to fight, and so does Eowyn, excuse me very much, but King Theoden and Eomer, returned by Carl Urban, not only doubts the girl is able to fight, and same goes with the Hobbit, and will eventually disobey both of them, and I'm enjoying this, but at the same time, I'm kind of bored. Aragorn sees Elrond and King Theoden's tent, and shows the sword that killed Sauron has been remade and sharpened as a powerful moment of the film. Aragorn realizes that Rohan is outnumbered and takes reluctantly Legolas and Gimli with him to get some more men who are dead and are ghosts, and to fight against the orcs, and I love that moment of the film. Denethor believes Faramir returned dead, but Pippin believes he's alive, and the fighting begins by throwing heads in some parts of buildings on Gondor, which was epic. Meanwhile, Frodo and Gollum go to the dark tunnel and sees dead bodies and spider webs led by Shelob, and Frodo is starting to regret not having Sam along, and Sam realizes Gollum threw away the Labrys bread and goes back, and Frodo uses the light Galadriel gave him in the Fellowship of the Ring, and gets out until Gollum betrays Frodo and tries to grab the ring, and Frodo doesn't know what to do until Galadriel helps him up, and I really love that disadvantaging dilemma that Frodo goes through. Denethor tries to burn Faramir as the Battle of Gondor continues, and the effects are just amazing, and they improved since the Fellowship of the Ring. Shelob stabs Frodo and webs him up, until Sam saves his life and fights Shelob and defeats the spider with the light, which was a good fight and good effects, and they even hold up today, which I thought is amazing. Back to Denethor burning Faramir alive. What a stupid move by Denethor, because he's not the king and has no authority to burn someone who believes his son is dead, when that's not true. Rohan fights while Eowyn and Merry come and fight with, and Gandalf helps Pippin save Faramir's life, and Gandalf's horse beats up Denethor, and he's on fire. Denethor, I mean, which was haunting and deservedly put for this movie. Meanwhile, King Theoden is down by an orc who stabbed Frodo in the Fellowship of the Ring and almost killed him, but Eowyn and Merry defeat him, which was courageous until King Theoden dies. Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli come with the army of ghosts and kills every single orc on battle and lets the ghost people be at peace, which was honorable, and I enjoyed this epic fight. Frodo gets captured by orcs because of Shelob, and Sam goes to rescue him, which was a heroic of Sam. And before Frodo tells Sam to go home earlier in the film, Sam takes the ring off screen because Sam thought he lost Frodo for good. And they into Mordor, and Frodo feels weak when he sees Sauron's eye. And if the eye sees him, because the ring is heavier, and they show that off very well, Aragorn, Gandalf, Legolas, Eomer, and Gimli distract the orcs while Frodo is in Mordor, and one of the orcs believes Frodo is dead, which isn't a true statement. And Aragorn with Merry and Pippin in the battlefield, which they're going to have a good fight, Frodo almost faints, and Sam reminds him of the spring when the birds will be nesting, and an unforgettable moment happens when Sam carries Frodo to the volcano until Gollum comes in and tries to take the ring with kind of a brutal fight, I must say. Frodo runs into the volcano to destroy Sauron's ring, and Frodo decides, you know what, I'm keeping it, the ring is mine, and puts it on, and Sam tries to stop Frodo, but Gollum, out of the blue, honestly I thought he was knocked out, but knocks out Sam and jumps on Frodo, which looked kind of green screen, but I can roll with it. Gollum bites off Frodo's finger and gets his precious, and Frodo fights back and tosses Gollum in the ring in the fire, and Sauron is finally defeated, and Frodo and Sam get out of the volcano, and we see Mordor is burning up for good, and they're stranded until the eagles come in and save them, and I'm glad they made it out alive. Frodo wakes up and finds Gandalf is alive, because he hasn't seen him since their Fellowship of the Ring, and sees also Merry, Pippin, Gimli, Legolas, and Aragorn, who is now the King of Gondor, and is crowned at the ceremony, and everyone bows to him, including Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin, and Aragorn says they bowed to no one, and everyone bows to them, and I thought that's a powerful moment of the film, and I wish it ended there, but we get 20 more minutes of ending with the hobbits returning to the Shire, and Sam has the courage to ask Rosie out on a date, and in case if you don't remember, she was in the first film briefly at Bilbo's party. And they get married and have kids of their own, and Frodo finishes Bilbo's book, There and Back Again, A Hobbit's Tale, and adds a new title called The Lord of the Rings, written by Frodo. And Gandalf takes Frodo and a very old Bilbo for another adventure, and Frodo leaves the Shire for good and says goodbye to Sam, Merry, and Pippin, and goes off for a new adventure, which was heartbreaking, but to be honest, cut the last 20 minutes out of the movie. We don't need multiple endings. Now it's time for the rating. I'll give this movie a 8.7 out of 10. This is the Oscar winner of the whole trilogy, and I did have problems. There were a couple of scenes to cut. One is Arwen discovering her son, and the other is the last 20 minutes of the film. But what I liked about it was it had great effects, an exciting story. I cared for the characters, and I wanted to succeed. This movie had some powerful moments in it, and the other nominees of the year were those movies don't stand a chance. Give it to this movie. This is a great movie. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me, and next week I will be back with The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey, and until next time, the fate of the ring has ended.